After Moses leads the Israelites out of slavery, they wander in the desert and then eventually settle in Canaan, the land of milk and honey. Joshua's their leader. Moses died. Okay, so after Joshua dies, God appoints a series of judges, people from their own tribes to lead them. Now, the people always want a king. They're always begging God for a king. They're like, please, pretty please, with cheese on top. And God always says no. God says, the Pharaoh who enslaved you is a king. You just got out of slavery. Why do you want to go back in? And they're like, kings have chariots and jewels and beautiful clothes. And God says, they don't pay for any of those things. They have those things because you are their slaves. And the people say, look at all of our prophets and our judges. You give us leaders who wear burlap, and there's always a sheep trailing after them or before them. They're like the cat lady. There's always a colony of stray cats they're feeding, and they look poor. Our leaders always look exactly like us. And God says, I look exactly like you. And the people say, that's the thing, you know what I mean? Look at all those other gods. They dress up. Look at Baal. He's got concrete wings. God says, is that a rave? The people say, yeah, that's the thing. They have bacchanals, like drugs, sex, rock and roll. Why don't we do that? And God, because you're going to get an STD, a sexually transmitted disease. You say, wait, here's him. Horns, tentacles coming out of his shoulder blades. God is like, gross. The people are like, okay, look at this God. And God's like, what is that? People are like, it's a mechanical bull. You can ride him. See, we can't get on top of you and ride you in the middle of a stadium with fireworks. God is that what you want from me? I liberated you from slavery. The people are like, okay, but how about the butt goddess? Curves to die for, look at those cheeks. God says that doesn't look natural. It might be. But if you have multiple children, this is the fertility goddess, right? Your waist can't be that tiny. Where's this? I don't see the stretch marks, honestly, the cellulite. And the people are like, that's not the point. You don't have anything special about you. Like every now and then you use nature to send a plague or you send us manna from the sky to eat, but you always use nature. The most fantastical thing you do is an act of nature. You're not fancy, you're not flashy, you're not freaky. You're definitely not giving us the image of a fairy tale life where you literally do nothing all day but be fanned by feathers and drink champagne. You're common, ordinary, day in, day out kind of God. You're just like us. And God says, I like being just like you. And people are like, we don't want a God who's just like us. We want a God who's different, unattainable, otherworldly, who lives in the clouds, in a crystal castle, who rides a Pegasus. God says, you want a fantasy to escape your reality. And I want the opposite. I want to be real. I want to be so real that you talk to me every day when we go feed the chickens together first thing in the morning. We cook breakfast together. We go sell our crafts at the farmer market together. We take our kids to school together. I just want to live with you, day in and day out. But that's not what you want? They say, heck no, we don't want God to be our next door neighbor. We want a king. And God says to them, but if you have a king, he will make all of you his subjects. He might be nice for 3 years, but on the 4th year, the power like a virus will infect his mind. And in 1 Samuel, God says to them, he will take your sons and assign him to war, and they will run before his chariot. He will make you do his plowing and his harvest and produce his weapons. He will use your daughters as cooks and bakers, and he will take your best vineyards and olive groves and tax you and give them to his bureaucrats. He'll tithe your crops and grape harvest. And he's going to take your male and female slaves as well as your best oxen and donkeys to do his work. And as for you, you'll become his slaves. And the people say, but at least we'll be serving someone. He'll tell us what to do. You don't tell us what to do. You make us think for ourselves. You're always reluctant to give us a leader because you want us to lead ourselves. You're trying to make us little me. You want to make us into kings. You want us to rule ourselves. Your whole goal is to train us so that every single one of us has the ability at any moment to step up and lead the entire nation. You want all of us to be co-creators with you, co-leaders with you. And God says, wow, that's a really accurate interpretation. Thanks for that. And they say, that's a lot of pressure. We don't want to be great. And God says, you know, the train's left the station, babe. You're already great. I made you great. Greatness is inborn within you. Those other gods affirm what you've been taught by other kings and other gods, that you're not great. You don't have the biggest butt in California. You don't have horns. How can you be great like we are? You've become addicted to not being great. You can't stop scrolling through those Instagram images of people who lay around in bikinis all day. You want anything that does not look like you, that's as far away and distant from your reality as possible. The world makes you their slave when you don't like yourself, when you don't make yourself. And the people say to God, I'd rather be a happy slave to someone else than a miserable king of my own life. And God says, I'm trying to show you how to be who you really are. Happy, no matter what you choose to be. When you choose to be a slave, I like you. When you choose to be a king, I like you. I like you no matter who you are. I just don't like it when you don't like yourself. Please write that in your journal. That God likes me no matter what I am. He just doesn't like it when I don't muck it. I don't like myself. The Israelite people say, that's the point. It's too much work to like myself. It's easier to like something, anything, as long as it's not me. And God says, when you don't like yourself, you don't like me, because I'm just like you. And the people say, that's the point, we don't like you. And the book of Judges says that the Israelites went off and they worshipped other gods. You know, The 7 Stages of Grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, right? God goes through all 7 stages in the Old Testament. He's in shock, then denial. Then he gets angry, and then he starts bargaining. He's all over the place. Biblical scholars are like, God's a hot mess in the Old Testament. Why doesn't he just cut the Israelites off? He keeps getting sucked into all their drama all the time. You know what? That's called a real relationship. A real relationship is where you stick it out with someone for a lifetime. Please write this in your journal. God has a real relationship with me. God is sticking it out with me for a lifetime. Never once does God get butt implants or super glue horns to his forehead just so you'll like him. He wants to be liked for who he is. God doesn't give up who he is just because the person he's in a relationship with gives up who they are. If you look at God in the Old Testament, he fights a lot with the Israelites. They argue, they fight, they disagree all the time for thousands of years. Their relationship goes through phases. Biblical scholars are like, why doesn't God just show his power and make them submit to him, his God? What does that mean? Make us his slaves and force us to accept his authority? God wants them to think for themselves. Over and over throughout the Old Testament, God doesn't want the Israelites to mingle with other nations who practice idolatry and are addicted to not being great. He wants them to be free and independent, to be their own authority. Please write this in your journal. God wants me to be my own authority. Now I'm going to tell you my opinion. Please feel free to disagree with me. I think God would rather fight and argue with you than just force you to obey and conform to someone else's authority, even if it's his. The last thing God wants is to raise his children to be slaves. He raises you to think for yourself and to trust your own authority. Even if you're mistaken, take the time to figure it out. It's worth it to become a leader, to be just like God, a co-creative partner, because that's the dream of your soul.